All right. So this week, we're going to finish up last week, which was nursing and the law and a little bit about ethics. And then we're going to jump into um, more about leadership and collaboration, delegation, that kind of stuff. Um, so just to finish up last week, because we only had a little bit of time after the exam, we didn't finish. So we're going to finish this. So, malpractice insurance. I don't remember if I covered this last week or not, but this is the slide that I had left up. Um, Malpractice insurance, why you should have malpractice insurance. So malpractice insurance protects you. It protects your license, right? You work as hard as you do to get your nursing license, right? And we want to do everything that we can do to protect it. And we know mistakes happen because we're human, right? And stuff is going to happen. So malpractice insurance, I always think of this as like your car insurance, right? You have it, you pay for it every month, but you pray you never have to use it, right? Like that's kind of how it is, right? Same thing with like homeowners insurance or renters insurance and things like that. Giselle, your camera is off. Um, so your,
You can't see me. It's I could see myself on the. Can anybody else
oh,
see
you
me?
know what?
I
I'm
see her.
sorry, Giselle, you're on here twice. That's why. Okay,
Okay.
got it. Sorry. Um, so things like you're only covered like your employer is going to have malpractice insurance, right? But if the award to the plaintiff is higher than what um they are willing to pay or have the ability to pay, or if they pay out an award, they can come back and countersue you to recoup that money, or if you switch jobs. So this is important to notice too, or know too. Um, there's a statute of limitations for things, okay? So you may have left a job and went on to another job and you don't work for that company anymore. And now, with that statute of limitations, something happens and you're not going to be covered by that previous employer's insurance anymore, should something happen. So be aware that that could happen. It's not super expensive. It's not as expensive as car insurance and other things, but it is something that you should consider. There's a variety of different places where home that you can get malpractice insurance. It is a little bit cheaper as a student to get it. Um, and then if I think the prices, I think it's like $100 a year, maybe a little bit more, not 100% sure. All right, then we get into negligence. And so, with say something happens, there are four elements that are needed to prove negligence: duty, breach of duty, damages, and proximate cause. Okay, so go into those. So, duty means that it refers or it's the nurse's responsibility to provide care in an acceptable way. Okay. The nurse has a duty based on education as well as the policy and the standards of the place of employment. Breach of duty means that you didn't adhere to the standards of care. What was expected of you was either not done, which is what we call an act of omission, or it was not done correctly, which is an act of commission. And the biggest part of this is there's always going to be an expert nurse, that witness that establishes the standard of care. Okay. Damages mean that the client must be able to show that the nurse's negligent act injured him in some way, and they're the ones that have to prove the damage. Okay, not it's they have to prove that there was damage. And then proximate cause means that there was a cause and effect relationship between either the act of omission or the act of commission of the act and the harm to the client. So, did your negligent act harm that client? So, for example, you're taking care of a client who has hypertension. All right. And either an act of omission would be you didn't give them their blood pressure medication. An act of commission would be you gave them the wrong dose of their medication. All right. And because of that, they had a stroke. And now they're going to come back and they're going to say, because you didn't give them their blood pressure medication, that's the reason why they had a stroke. Okay. So that would be you had a duty to that patient, you breached that duty, there was damages, and now the client has to prove that because you didn't give them the medication or that you gave them the wrong med or the wrong dose of the med, that is what. So the client has they have the, they have to prove that there was damage. So what happens is client believes that, you know, um, whatever, that the nurse violated their rights in whatever way. They are going to go to an attorney, right? That attorney, the first thing that attorney is going to do is going to get all the records and is going to have a nurse expert review the chart. That nurse expert is going to decide if there was a breach in the standard of care. Okay. If there was, if they can show that there was some violation of the standard of care, that is when it's going to go further. All right. So they'll file the complaint. Then, they'll do the disposition or the depositions and the investigation and then go to court. Okay. But it all really depends on that nurse expert. They're the ones that are going to review that chart to see if there was a violation in the standard of care. One thing, too, that you should know is that policy and procedures of the organization that you are working with. If it's a policy violation, those policies are able to be presented in court. So I know I've said it a million times, know your Nurse Practice Act, but always make sure that you know the policy and procedures of the organization that you're working for, because if you violate those policies and procedures, that could come back and hurt you as well. Oops. All right. So here we go. When we look at this, the nurse caring for a client miscalculated the dose of medication and administered it to the client who was successfully resuscitated. Which legal action can be taken against the nurse? Okay, so for one, this is an unintentional tort. They didn't mean to miscalculate the dose, but it happened. All right, harm was not intended. But the nurse did not maintain the standard of nursing care and did not do what a prudent nurse would do with comparable education and skills. All right. So I know dosage calculations is, it's such an important part. And I know a lot of you don't like to do dosage, but it's super important. And if you miscalculate a dose and a patient was harmed, then you could be held liable. Did anybody see there was just recently where a nurse miscalculated the morphine dose and gave the patient like 10 times the amount of morphine that they were supposed to get? Did anybody see that? No, nobody heard about that. So be careful with
We
that.
heard about it.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Privacy and confidentiality. So there are some things that we have to report, okay? And it does not require, it's not a violation of HIPAA, all right? So communicable diseases, you will know, depending on where you're working, okay? If you're curious, you can also go to your local health department website. What diseases need to be reported. So communicable diseases, like I know we've reported, I had to report chickenpox. We had a case of mumps. What else? What's else? Salmonella. Those are all reportable to the health department. So you have to know which ones that you can. It is not a violation of HIPAA to report that. Any vaccine related adverse reactions, we also report that to the Department of Health and Human Services. There's also another, you can also report it to the FDA because they still monitor any adverse reactions to vaccines. Criminal acts, all states mandate reporting of rape cases. Some will report and mandate reporting of like shootings or stabbings, or like elevated blood alcohol levels. This is just going to be something that is state specific and may even be locality specific. So depending on where you work, you may have to know if there's a clear and present danger. So HIPAA laws mandate reporting of client mistreatment or professional misconduct. All right, so that you would report to your supervisor or follow whatever the manual is for that. Any equipment related injuries. So when use of a medical device results in injury or death, it is reported immediately to your supervisor and the healthcare provider. And, of course, if the patient needs any first aid, you'll provide first aid. But this is another something that is reportable. And then, of course, we know about abuse and neglect of a child or elderly. You are mandated mandatory reporters. So if you suspect abuse of an elderly person or a child, you need to follow your facility policies on how to report and who to report to. Most of them you're going to report either to your supervisor or your DON, depending on where you're working. I'm going to ask this question though. Why do we not report just the average adult abuse? So if I were going into the emergency room because I got beat up by my spouse, why would we not report that? Why is that different than reporting a child or an elderly person's abuse?
Because it may
It's a
put the
docking station.
person in danger once they get back home.
Absolutely. It may put them in danger, right? If they don't have an escape and there's kids or animals or whatever at the house, it may put them in danger, but we can provide them some resources, right? So that they could, now, if they want us to, absolutely, right? We
And
can
some
call the
people
police.
go back.
Yep. They're not ready to leave, right? They don't, so we don't make that decision. We can ask them, hey, do you want us to call the police? Like, what do you want us to do? But that's the difference. We don't want to put them in any additional danger, but we can offer resources. The patient care partnership, the client's rights. So and everywhere you go, if you look in, um, when you walk into like a healthcare facility, usually we'll see a sign. It used to say, I don't know, it used to say Patient's Bill of Rights. Now usually it'll say something like the clients or the patient care partnership. The purpose of this is, of course, patients should expect high quality care, clean, safe environment, but this is here to promote that client provider relationship. We want the patients, we want the clients to be involved in their care. And this is part of that. We want them to be involved in their care. They have the right to protection of privacy. They also have the right to help when leaving the hospital. Do they need, assistance with setting up appointments? Do they need durable medical equipment? What's the help that they need? And then, of course, help with billing claims. We all know that that's a huge part of any hospital stay. HIPAA is your Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. This was, but in the early 2000s, I think, is when this went into effect. But the original intent of HIPAA was portability of insurance, so going from one job to the next. But the main focus of the law is privacy. All right. So when we are coordinating client care, we have to adhere to the minimum necessary rules to protect the client's privacy. We're not just going to give out all of their information, but in the event, let's say Mr. Jones is going home and Mr. Jones needs a wheelchair and a bedside commode, or maybe a walker or some oxygen, whatever it is. He needs equipment delivered to his house prior to him getting home. We can order that equipment. We can call up whatever the DME agency is. We can give Mr. Jones's name. We can give Mr. Jones's address, and we can give them the payer information, right? Because can't have Mr. Jones go home if he really needs to have that oxygen when he gets there, right? So we are allowed to do that. You're allowed to give that information. Excuse me, any other information that the company may need, they can get from Mr. Jones when they deliver the equipment. All HIPAA requires that HIPAA requires that all covered entities designate a privacy officer. So when you go to the doctor or you go to the hospital, um, you all sign a HIPAA disclosure. Okay, you sign the privacy. What is it called? I forget what it's called. The private. It's a what is it called? The HIPAA privacy or HIPAA policy, whatever it is that they have in that organization. Everybody signs one. Anytime you enter healthcare, you have the right to get a copy of that as well. So a lot of you will, I know most of it's electronic now. But if you want a copy of it, that's the notice of privacy practice. That's what it's called. You can ask for a copy of it and they will print a copy of it. But HIPAA requires that everybody that is covered under HIPAA, they have a designated privacy officer. So if you think for whatever reason that your privacy was violated, whether it's at your doctor's office, whether it's at a clinic, the urgent care, emergency, the hospital, there is that contact information is in the notice of privacy practices. So they would contact that person and they're the ones that will do the investigation to determine if there was any breach in that person's privacy. So every covered entity is going to have that privacy officer. A couple other things when we look at client competency. So client competency is legal and clinical as well. Okay, so some of the client's rights issues are based on proof of competence or incompetence. So in most states, okay, legal competency is someone that is 18 years of age or older, a pregnant or married woman, a self-supporting minor, which we used to call this the legally emancipated minors, that they are also competent in the eyes of the law. Okay, so when we look at incompetence, incompetence is determined by the court. Nobody else can determine incompetence. Okay, so if you want to have somebody determined incompetent, it is a court. When we look at clinical competency, it's a little bit different. They need to be able to understand the problem that they're seeking healthcare for. They need to understand their options for care, and the possible consequences. They need to be able to make a decision based on reason. And that is generally what we call, what is that? What is this? What is this called right here? Ability to understand problems, options, and make a decision. What is that called? Anybody know?
You
Consent,
said
right?
what is the ability? What'd you say?
Informed consent, right? So we have different levels of consent, general or implied consent that is obtained on admission. Okay, so you check yourself into the emergency room because you broke your finger. Okay, you are basically signing consent saying, yes, I'm here, I want to be treated. All right. And you voluntarily have sought admission to whatever that agency is. Informed consent is obtained for invasive procedures, okay, whether it's done for therapeutic or diagnostic reasons. So let's say you have to have a CT with contrast. That is an invasive procedure. We're going to get informed consent. If you have to have a surgery, you're going to have to sign informed consent. Authorized consent, a little bit different. This is what we give for our kids. Parents don't give informed consent. Informed consent can only be done by the person receiving the care, and kids aren't old enough to give informed consent. So parents sign authorized consent, right? Saying that they can, they're authorizing care to be given to their child. Okay, so it's a little bit different, right? Because kids can't sign an informed consent because they're not of age. So with informed consent, right, they have to know what the diagnosis is or what the suspected diagnosis is, right? Because a lot of times may have to do a procedure in order to determine the diagnosis. The purpose, the description of the treatment, right? The good, the bad, the ugly. What could happen? What could happen if I don't get the treatment done? Videos and things like that are okay. That will serve as education. So I'm going to see as an example, I had cataract surgery a couple years ago. I had early onset cataracts. I'm not old, okay? Um, and to explain the procedure, I mean, he went through a little bit of it, but he literally, they sat me down in front of a computer and had me watch videos of the procedure. All right. So that's okay, right? As long as you're providing that information. Now, I still had time to ask questions to determine, like what anything else I needed to know after watching the video. They also need to be explained the outcomes, the benefits, and the potential side effects of the alternative treatments that are available to them. The people that are going to be performing the procedure. So, what's the name of the doctor? What are his qualifications? Is there going to be a resident or an intern or somebody else in there doing the procedure? The prognosis of the treatment is if the treatment is not done. So if I don't decide to have this treatment done, what could happen to me? And then of course any answers and then an explanation that the client has the right to revoke permission at any time. So as a nurse, all we do is we witness informed consent, right? We don't explain, we don't do anything. We just witness their signature. So if you go in and you have a patient that says to you, I don't know who's going to be performing the surgery, or I have some more questions. What do? We don't have them sign. We go get the provider. We bring the provider back and we have them explain it to them again. Doesn't matter how many times. If we have to explain it 20 times, then they explained it 20 times. Oops. Living wills and advanced directives. So we have something called the Patient Self-Determination Act. All right. And it was an amendment to the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act. But under your PDSA, it includes the advanced directives. All right. And we have basically really two different types. We have living wills and we have durable power of attorney. So a living will is something that we write that describes the kind of medical treatment or life-sustaining treatments that you would want if you were seriously or terminally ill. So this is something you can do while you're young. All right. Do you want blood products? Do you want to be trached? Do you want, CPR? Do you want a tube feeding? Do you want surgeries? Do you want hydration, pain management? Trying to think of what else. Do you want to be an organ donor? Although organ donation is usually on your driver's license. But this is something you can set up and you can have ready. The other part of this is your durable medical power of attorney. This is different from a living will. Durable power of medical attorney is a legal document. It is valid in all 50 states. And it appoints a healthcare proxy. So somebody over the age of 18 that you trust explicitly to make decisions or healthcare decisions for you in the event that you cannot make them for yourself. Okay. So you have to be really careful, right? Make sure that you trust, you choose someone that you trust explicitly, that you know are going to follow through with whatever it is, right, that you want to have done. Your DNRs or do not resuscitate orders, that's another advanced directive based on the PDSA. Basically, what this is it gives the provider the permission to write the order. So let's say you decide that you want to be a DNR. All right. You remember, there was a little trend there where people were getting DNR like tattooed on their chest and other places. That is not a legal order. Okay. You can't just have that done. You go to your doctor and whatever the diagnosis is, maybe it's terminal, maybe it's not, but you say, hey, I want to be a DNR. And then the doctor will write the order for you to be a DNR and submit the appropriate paperwork for you to be a DNR. It is a special list. It also may list some of your preferences on that DNR, like some of the things that you do want, some of the things that you do not want, also may be listed on that DNR. Oops, sorry. When we get into end of life. So when we look at end of life care, there's lots of ethical considerations when we look at end of life care. So, first of all, I'm going to say physicians assisted suicide. The physician provides the means for death. Okay, most often with a prescription. This has become legal in quite a few states. I know Oregon's one, I know New Jersey's one, I know there's other states. Those are the two that pop into my head. So the provider will provide the patient with a prescription for whatever medications they offer. And then the patient and ultimately, right, chooses when they are going to do it. Euthanasia is something completely different. Euthanasia is where the healthcare provider administers the lethal medication. And so we saw this. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of Dr. Kevorkian before, but he is the one that kind of brought this out into the open. Euthanasia is not legal in the United States. Okay, but like I said, there are some states that allow for physicians assisted suicide. When we look at removal of life support systems, the physician must declare the patient dead before like if like let's say they're on a ventilator, the physician has to declare them dead before we can shut off the ventilator. All right. If the physician does not pronounce them dead before we shut off the ventilator, then that could be considered an act of murder. So we have to be very careful in that there have been situations where that has happened. And then our Good Samaritan Act. Who's heard of the Good Samaritan Act? So the Good Samaritan Act is there. It says that a person who renders emergency care in good faith at the scene of an accident is immune from civil liability for his or her actions while providing care. Each state's Good Samaritan Act or Good Samaritan Act is probably going to be a little bit different. But this is the goal of the Good Samaritan Act was to encourage people. If you drive by or witness an accident, it's there to encourage people to stop and assist at a scene of an accident, especially if they need medical help. And then we have euthanasia. So, anybody want to work hospice care, or has anybody worked with hospice patients before? Yeah. Um, Process of dying, it's in some cases it's very quick, in some cases it is a little bit slower depending on the patient. But the reason why I bring hospice care up, and I'll tell you in a second. So we have different types of euthanasia. We have active and we have passive. Okay. So, active are actions that speed up the process of dying. Okay. They actively end a person's life, it initiates the dying process. This is the euthanasia that is morally wrong and legally not allowed. Okay. It is forbidden by your professional organization. So, the American Nurses Association, especially, has definitely like says that nurses cannot participate in active euthanasia. Passive euthanasia is something more like we use with our hospice patients. Okay. We're not prolonging their life. Okay. We're not preserving their life. We're just allowing the process, right, of dying to continue. This is the morally permissible, the legally allowed, and it is approved by professional organizations. So, for example, with hospice patients, right, they're in that active dying process. there's medications that we provide. A lot of times, it's morphine or Ativan because some will get a little agitated towards the end of life. Okay. So, giving medications, pain medications that may hasten death and relieve suffering for a terminally ill person is justifiable by the court, and it is approved by the American Nurses Association. So, we don't want to, even though we know, okay, that if I give them this dose of morphine, that it may hasten their death, right? Make it happen sooner than later, right? But we also don't want our patient to be pain free, or we want our patient to be pain free. So that is the difference, okay? We're not actively causing their death. We are just not stopping the process. If that makes sense. Does that make sense? No, it sounds a little weird, but um, all right, so we finished up that. So we're going to go to what we need to talk about now for this week. And this is chapter 17. It's collaborating and it's collaboration, leading and managing. This part, the delegation, when we get to delegation towards the end of this chapter, is going to be a huge part of your HESI as well. And then in your HESI book, if nobody has like looked at it, um, I don't remember what chapter. I think it was chapter 2 or 3. Don't quote me. There's more in there that can help you prepare for your HESI. And I was looking in it earlier. There's also some stuff in there that would help you for this exam next week as well. So some of the legal and ethical stuff is at the beginning of the chapter. So that's another really good resource for you. So leading and managing. So we're going to just jump into chapter 17. So the first thing as a future LPN, as a future nurse, you are a first line leader in a lot of organizations, okay, especially in long-term care. Most long-term care facilities have their LPNs as charge nurses. The facility I work at, one of the assistant director of nurses is an LPN. She is the assistant director on the long-term care side. So there's lots of opportunities. There's supervisors, there may be unit managers that also, as an LPN. So you have, lots of expanded roles. As a charge nurse, you are required or you will be expected to supervise your nursing assistants. And so it's super important that you develop your leadership and your management skills. Who's ever read a mission statement? Nobody's ever read a mission statement? So all organizations have a mission statement, which is their vision. It defines their purpose, it states their values, their culture, their norms. And so when you go work for an organization, it's important to know what their mission statement is because one of your jobs in that role as an LPN or a charge nurse or whatever it is that you're going to be doing is to work towards that vision and help that organization meet its goals. So when you are looking for positions, and I will tell you from experience that as you are applying for positions, sometimes they're going to ask you questions related to their mission statement, like how does our mission statement match with what your personal goals are? So be mindful of that if you've never looked when you go to get, when you start applying for jobs, make sure that you're looking at those things. You always want to know, again, say it probably 1,000 times during this class, know your state's current Nurse Practice Act on your role and your boundaries. Because when you get into a position, you want to make sure that that position is, it is in alignment with what you can do under your Nurse Practice Act. This is an organizational chart or your chain of command. I call it chain of command because I'm prior military and that's kind of what we call it. But this just tells you what the layout of the organization is. So this one's a nursing home. So you have the owner of the nursing home, the board of directors, and then each one of the departments. And underneath the departments, you are going to see who falls under that department. Now, this is generic. On a real, like an actual organizational chart, it may look a little bit different. Um, this would be broken down just for nurses, but your names will be here. Okay. So, this would say, Ambo Briggs, and then under Ambo, it would have the nursing assistants or the UAPs that would fall under Ambo. And then maybe over here, this one says Tia, and then the nursing assistants and the UAPs that would fall under Tia. Okay, so why is it important to know what your chain of command is? For a variety of reasons, right? For one, it tells you who you have to support you or who you need to report to. All right, so here we have a DON, we have a supervisor, and we have a nurse manager. Okay, the nurse manager appears to be over both units. All right. So if something happens and you need assistance, then you could go to your nurse manager, right? And if they're not there, you have your supervisor, your DON. So it kind of, and then it tells you where you fall within the organization. So leadership, we look at leadership skills. If you've never been in a leadership position, if you've never had to manage people, this is something that you may want to start thinking about, because as a nurse, regardless of what you're doing, you are going to supervise and manage people. Even if you are a med nurse, you are going to manage your CNAs or your UAPs, right? So you need to know and start to develop your leadership skills. There's differences between leadership and management. All right. Managers, they are more task oriented, more directed towards discipline, empowering control. They instruct others. They have subordinates. They are appointed by whoever it is in that organization. Whereas leaders are a little bit more people oriented. They provide motivation, they work towards the vision and a strategy, they listen, they empower, they have followers, they delegate duties. So there's a big difference between your leaderships and your managers. So again, management, that's the organization of all care required for clients. So you have all of your clients, you're going to manage that care. And then, of course, leadership, right? That is how a person empowers and develops your team. Um, With leadership, it may not have a formal authority, but they are still able to influence others. And this is what we call our informal leaders. So if you've ever worked somewhere, there's always that one person that you work with that knows where everything is, know who to go to talk to um, like if you need something, this is who you go to talk to. Oh, you need linen? I know, I got you. Here, come on, let's go find this. Or, whatever it is. They don't have the formal power, but I always find it's a CNA, a CNA who has been there for a while, knows everybody, and they know exactly where to go and get what they need. So again, it's not always, um, somebody that is in charge or in a formal leadership position, but sometimes it's someone that just knows where everything is. So, things that you need to know as you get ready to go into nursing and start to lead people. Again, you are going to be overseeing your CNAs and your UAPs. So you need to have your good basic nursing skills. You need to have good time management. You need to know how to learn new information, the power of positive self-talk and thinking, rules for assertiveness, communication skills, your ethical aspects of healthcare, the legal aspects. You need to have good problem solving and critical thinking skills, stress management skills, and you need to know how to participate in clinical evaluation. So let's start. I'm going to start with The power of positive self-talk and thinking. How many of you have worked with a Debbie Downer? Where you walk into work and you're like, hey, good morning. And they're like, how are you? I'm here. How are you doing? I'm fine.
Every day.
Really? Oh, that's horrible. Um, how does it make you feel? Like, how does that make you feel? How does it make you or anybody else member of the team feel?
Like you don't really want to be around it. It's draining.
It's draining, right? Nobody wants to work with a Debbie Downer, right? Where never happy, they're always complaining. We never have staff. We never have this. We never have that. Oh my gosh, I have to do so much work and da 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 da. Nobody wants to hear that on a daily basis. Okay. As a nurse, as a leader with especially with your CNAs, you set the tone for your unit. Okay. If you come in and you're like, oh, I'm here, then how is that, how are your CNAs going to respond to that? They're going to think, well, you don't care. So, why should we care? And again, it makes it hard to want to go to work if you know that that is what you're going to have to deal with every day when you go to work. So you have the ability to set the tone for your unit. And I know that everybody has bad days and stuff happens, but take it in stride, have a positive attitude when you are going into work, because you set the tone, okay, for your unit. And that includes not just your people that you work with, but that's including your patients, your clients, right? If you're always in a bad mood, then that's gonna come down. It'll go, your patients are gonna recognize that too, especially in a long-term care facility where you're going to be seeing these people every day for long periods of time. It's not, it's not like a hospital where, they're just there for their hospital admission. This is their home. So always present yourself in, a positive way. Stress management is another key aspect of this. Stress management, not only do you have to learn how to manage your own stress, but you're going to have to manage the stress of the unit. So your CNAs and other people, getting, overwhelmed or, it's a busy day on the unit. You need to be able to learn how to manage that stress. Leadership styles. So we have three basic leadership styles. We have autocratic, democratic, I always say demographic. We have laissez-faire, okay? Autocratic style, I think of the military, okay? They just give orders, okay? Go pick up the trays from the dining room, go get linen from diet, or go get linen from laundry. Go put Mr. Jones on the toilet. Go give Mr. Jackson his medications, okay? Just giving orders, it doesn't require a whole lot of feedback. Laissez-faire, on the other hand, is kind of a hands-off approach. All right, you guys run the unit. I'm going to sit in my office with my feet up on the desk. Okay, very hands-off. They want everybody to be happy, so they're not going to have like a whole lot of oversight. And then Democratic is somewhere in the middle. All right. Democratic balances the tasks as well as the employee and brings it together so that's a nice little balance. So, oops, again, autocratic, they don't share responsibility. Emphasis is always on the policy. They tell you, these are the tasks that you need to be done. I don't want any input back. Autocratic style leadership is good in certain situations, crisis situations, codes, emergencies, right? If I have a code, I need somebody to take charge, right? Lorraine, go call 911. Janet, you start compressions. Glory, you do, respirations. And let's say, Tamia, you're going to be the scribe, okay? So everybody knows exactly what their responsibilities are, right? Same thing in an emergency situation like a tornado, a hurricane. All right, guys, all of y'all, there's, however many are you, okay? Each one of you go grab brooms. We need to pull everybody out into the hallway, right? So everybody knows the specific task that they are going to need to be done. Laissez-faire, again, like I said, it gives away responsibility and authority to the employees. So y'all got the unit. I'll be in my office if you need anything. It doesn't matter whatever chaos is going to happen on that unit. I'm going to be hands off. It does put the employees first. We want the employees to be happy. So if me not telling you what to do all day or you reminding you what to do all day is what makes you happy, then kind of what I'm going to do. There's days, there's days where leaders don't need to be front and center 24/7, right? The unit is, got a good staff, everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, everybody's getting along. And so I may not need to be on the unit the whole day, directing traffic, so to speak, or telling people what to do, right? So they both have their place. Most people, and then of course, like I said, the Democratic, they share responsibility, they enforce the policies, but still show concern for employees. They seek input from employees and encourage problem solving. And so this is good in your daily nursing situations, meetings, committees, care plans, that kind of thing. This is what most people do, okay, is what we call situational leadership, okay? Your style of leadership changes depending on the situation, right? Most of us tend to be democratic leaders, right? Um, you know, all right, guys, we've had an increased number of falls on the unit lately. Let's all sit down and see what's going on. Let's see what are some issues going on the unit. Why have we had more falls lately? Or why do we have more pressure areas all of a sudden? Like what's going on, right? It's sitting down, it's collaborating. We're talking about what's going on. We're identifying risk factors. We're, trying to think of some out of the box ways to prevent stuff from happening or make it better. Or if something happens, so that might be, and then what if a code happens? Okay, then we're going to switch our leadership style. We're going to go to that autocratic leadership style and start telling people, okay, you go do this, you go do that, you go do this, right? So that there is some sort of structure. And then, like I said, maybe the unit is running great that day. Staff is great. Everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. So I can have a little bit more of a hands-off approach that day, right? Since everything seems to be running smooth. So this is generally how most leaders work. They change their leadership style based on the situation at hand. Other things that you need to know or, have in order to be a good leader. You need to be able to motivate your team members, okay? You need to be able to communicate clearly. You need to be able to problem solve. You need to be able to collaborate and effectively build that team. Again, like I said earlier, you also need to be able to manage stress. And like I said, it's not always our stress that we're managing. A lot of times we're managing other people's stress. How do we keep it nice and calm on the unit? Because we know stress can spread very quickly. All right, I'm sorry, I didn't realize it had been this long. So let's take a break. Be back at 3:25.
Did she give us a little break?
Yeah, we on a break.
Yeah. Thank
So
you.
25.
To 25. Okay, thank you.
All right. So we look at human needs. These are things that we have to understand, not just to take care of our patients, excuse me, but it is something that when we are working with coworkers that we also need to understand. We all have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of human needs before, right? The basic needs are your physiological, then your safety, your love and belongingness, then your esteem, and then your self-actualization. So meeting needs on one level of the pyramid acts as a motivator, right, for meeting needs on the next level. And so when we have difficulties that we are faced with, um, physical or emotion, doesn't matter. Some regression will take place, right? So, for example, physiological needs become a priority if you've lost your job or you lose your housing, right? Those basic physiological needs are going to take priority. Safety and security needs become a major issue if you're facing a serious illness or if you move into an unsafe neighborhood or you're facing a divorce, right? That's where your safety and security would come into play. When we look at motivating factors and this would be the hierarchy of work motivators. Okay. So, how do we motivate? So, when we're looking for a job, there's things that we look at. We look at how much are they going to pay us, right? The benefits, what are the working conditions? What's the supervision? What's the policies? Then we go into safety and security of, interprofessional relationships. And then, the recognition, growth, responsibility, and then achievement and advancement is at the top. All right. So these are some, when we look at motivators for work, right? These are kind of the things that not only for ourselves, but for our nursing assistants and those that we're supervising, right? So, if, nursing assistants see that doing a good job helps them meet to personal needs, they'll also meet the needs of the, employer. And allowing for growth opportunities also helps to enhance their motivation. And it's the same thing for us, whether it's we're motivating ourselves. And there are some things that cause motivation or allow for motivation. And we have intrinsic and extrinsic factors. So, intrinsic factors, when we look at intrinsic motivators or intrinsic factors, um, these are job satisfiers. These are things that increase our job satisfaction and contribute to personal growth. Okay, so we kind of saw that on that hierarchy, right? Achievement, recognition, the value, the potential for growth, the potential for advancement, as well as responsibility. Some of the things that are dissatisfactors or make us not want to work or stay in a position that we're in: company policy, company administration, supervision, salary, interprofessional or interpersonal relations and work conditions, right? So, I mean, think about it. If you're always going in, just like I said, working with Debbie Downer, right? If you're always going in and you're always getting fussed at, or, there's always something going wrong, or there's never staff and there's never supplies, right? Those are things like, oh my gosh, I don't know why I'm here. Why do I keep doing this, right? And this doesn't just happen in healthcare. This can happen anywhere. Those are things that make you not want to stay somewhere, right? Or not make you want to perform to your highest level of your abilities. So we want to increase job satisfaction. And I'm not saying every job is going to be perfect, okay? Every job is going to have something, right? What is the saying? The grass isn't always greener, right? You're working in one place and you're, someplace else they're going to have their own problems. But some of the things that really attribute to, job satisfaction, value, growth, connection, empowerment, right? If you have supportive supervisors and supportive managers, people that really push you, right, to do your best, And this goes for us as well. We need to be the motivators. We need to be the ones that are pushing our CNAs to do more. You see CNAs that are really smart and they're really working hard and they just know, they pick up on things quickly. Encourage them, push them, to encourage them to learn, encourage them to go back to school. Sometimes people just need a little bit of an external motivator, right, in order to achieve goals. Not everybody has, they go in, they do their job and they're doing it really well. But if they're not getting the recognition and saying, hey, you're really good, you're really smart, you should go back to school. Sometimes that's enough to say, wow, maybe I am really good at what I do. Maybe I should go back to school. But everybody wants to know if they're doing a good job, right? You go in every day and you're like, what's the purpose of this? Every once in a while, it's really nice to say, you're doing a good job. Thanks for everything that you do. And we talked about this, the availability equipment, unrealistic workload, regulatory demands. These are job dissatisfiers. Now, I will tell you sometimes the satisfaction outweighs the dissatisfiers. Some days are better than others. Depends on, what's going on in the facility. We've talked a lot about communication over the last few weeks, but you also, as a leader, as a manager, you have to have good communication techniques, whether it's verbal, you're nonverbal, you're written, talking on the telephone. Does anybody talk on the phone anymore? Don't call me if you can send me a text message, right? I don't need to answer my phone, just send me a text message. But no, as you'll have to answer the phone for coworkers, you'll have to answer the phone for family members, you have to call providers, you may have to call lab and x-ray and transportation, right? There may be, DME companies. So you need to have good professional speaking skills when you're on the phone as well, and make sure that you're always using those active listening skills that you've learned. Change of condition, we've talked about SBAR. When we do baseline report, always use your SBAR. Change of condition. All right, so this is a little bit different. We haven't talked about this, but this would be used if you're calling the provider for something that happens to one of your clients, right? You're going to still use your SBAR, and usually that's why we're calling the provider, right? Because it's a change from baseline. I had a fall, I have abnormal labs. All of a sudden I have new onset chest pain, right? So that's usually when we're calling the provider. So make sure that you use that wonderful SBAR. All right, oops, sorry. All right, so give me examples of, well, hold on to that. We'll come back to that. So stress management. All right, this is a big one. All right. Some of the things that we may see with stress, maybe our nursing assistants aren't performing like they used to. Maybe we've got some negative interactions or not, some ineffective communication, or we start seeing a high turnover of staff. All right. So when we look at stress management, this is something everybody should have some sort of stress management. Our job is to create a less stressful work environment for those that we are working with. And life skills, we can, offer some life skills to help control stress. And we need to be able to identify the stress. So tell me, what are some examples of some good, positive stress management techniques?
Deep breathe.
Okay, deep breathing. That works. What else?
Counting to 10.
Counting to 10. Okay, I like that one. Hold in your breath and just be like, okay, what else? What do y'all do to relieve your stress?
A quiet place.
Okay, a quiet place.
I color.
You color? Me
Pick a
too. I
wall.
love to color.
Walking.
I don't care
Take
how
a
old I
walk.
get. Give me some crayons and or some colored pencils and a coloring book, and I am happy. What
Um,
else?
music.
Music is a good one. Making sure that you're getting enough sleep, making sure that you're eating appropriately. Exercise is another one. Going to sometimes just taking a walk around the block or a walk around. Um, One of the ones, this is what I miss. Has anybody ever worked in a restaurant? Natasha, Tia, Joshua, Kiana, are you guys there? Um, when I grew up in a restaurant, my mom actually, she owned a bar when I was growing up in Brooklyn, but I worked in restaurants up until I joined the Navy. And then even after I joined the Navy, when I was in nursing school, I worked at a restaurant, but I miss being able to go into the freezer and just scream because nobody can hear you, and it was just a good way to like let that stress out. So, there's things like that that you can do. Um, you know, um, some people like, just even gardening or like you said, listening to music, reading a book, just really stepping away for a minute. But when we're on the job, we don't always have, all this time to do a lot. So there's still times that we have to step away. Make sure your CNAs are taking their breaks. Make sure you're taking your break. And I know, trust me, I've been in healthcare a long time and I know how stressful it is. But make sure that you're taking your scheduled breaks. Walk away. You need that 10 or 15-minute break. You need that 30-minute lunch break or whatever your lunch break is, depending on what hours you're working. But you need to step away. And I don't mean clock out and go back to the desk or, keep doing what you're doing. I mean clock out, go to your car, take a walk in, walk around outside, whatever it is, to get away. And if you don't have a good stress reducing activity that you can do, find something that you like to do. This will help you. And I mean, sometimes it could be as simple as calling your best friend, calling, a family member or somebody that you're really close to and be like, hey, I just need to vent for a minute. And I've done that. Like I've done that. Like I'll call, on my way home from work, I'll call my husband and be like, hey, I don't need you to say anything. I just need you to listen. And I'll just yell or, say what I have to say. And he's always like, do you feel better now? And I'm like, yes, thank you. Sometimes you just need to get it off your chest so that you can, kind of let it just go. But everybody needs to have some stress relief and things like Pilates and yoga and massage. Sometimes those cost a little bit of money, right? And we don't always have the time to do that. But try to find something the positive, and I say positive, like I'm not saying that, alcohol and smoking and all that other stuff, positive things that are not going to be detrimental to your health. So, how to make a life less stressful. One is organize your shift. Now, as you go into practice, you're going to know what your job responsibilities are of the day. And so you'll be able to organize your shift appropriately so that you can get everything done. Make sure that you have the resources for your nursing assistants. And trust me, I've been in facilities where there's no linen. Like, can't find towels, you can't find washcloths, you can't find sheets, right? Which can be very frustrating, not just for you, but it can be frustrating for your CNAs as well if they don't have the resources they need to do their job. Make sure your CNAs and your UAPs also take their breaks. So, when I used to do, and I've worked a variety of different types of units, different sizes. Most of my units were very large, so I usually had anywhere between 4 and 6 CNAs on my unit. And so I always made sure that when I did the assignments for the day, that I put their lunch times on there as well. All right, so can't have all the CNAs going to lunch at the same time. The CNAs, of course, for day shift, right? They have to be there for breakfast and lunch because it's an all hands on deck for meals. So I would scatter their lunches, usually send 2 or 3 at a time, but I would have it on their assignment sheet so that when those CNAs were on lunch, the other CNAs knew, right, that they had to cover, the rest of the unit while while the CNAs were at lunch. So it's kind of just a respect thing. There's times though, where they may have to be like, hey, can I switch my lunch with this person because of this? Whatever, that's fine, right? But you want to make sure that they take their lunches and treat your CNAs with respect. This is a big thing. Who's a CNA already? How many of your nurses answer call bells? Okay, Nakira, you have nurses that
None,
answer call.
none.
None. Don't do that. Like,
I
um,
would never.
so I work night shift, okay? So usually it's me, anywhere between, I would say 30 to 40 residents, depending on how many admissions we've had, and usually about two CNAs. We work skilled care, so a lot of our patients are walkie-talkie, a lot of them are independent, but we also have quite a few that are total care and are pretty large individuals, okay? So we do a lot of teamwork, a lot of teamwork. If my CNAs, if I'm sitting at the desk and I'm not really doing anything and a call bell goes off, I'm going to answer the call bell. If that patient needs to be changed, I'm going to change them. Um, Not all nurses are like that. Don't be like that. Like we all know how to do basic care. We all know how to do ADLs. We all know how to change patients. If you're not doing anything and your CNAs are busy, go answer that call bell. All the facilities that I've ever worked in, if a call bell goes off, it's anybody's responsibility. So we would actually be written up if we passed a room and the call light was on and we didn't step in that room to answer the call light. So that is the mindset that I have. Um, Always say thank you. Always say thank you. Like at the end of the shift, like I say thank you throughout the shift, but at the end of the shift, when they're leaving, I'm always like, thank you so much. I appreciate you. You don't have to bring them roses and you don't have to bring them food every time you go to work and but a simple thank you, a sincere thank you is something that goes a very long way. And your willingness to help. So like I'm training a new nurse, um, and he'll sit there, he'll literally, and I can't. So I guess one of the things too is I have a little bit of ADHD and the stimulation from the call bells drives me nuts. So I knew where the CNAs were. I had one CNA was in one room down the hallway, the other one was in another room down the hallway. And I don't know what, they were. I just knew they were in the rooms. I'm not sure like what exactly the residents needed. And another call light went off on the other nurse's hall. And so I'm sitting there and I'm waiting. And I see him look up to see what room number it was. And I'm waiting and I'm waiting. And 5 minutes goes by and I'm like, okay, like go answer that call bell. And he just looked at me like he was like, what do you mean? I'm like, that's your hallway. Your CNA is busy. Go answer the call bell. And he didn't know he didn't know what to say to me. And I'm like, please go answer the call bell because it's driving me nuts. And so he got up and he went down to the room and he comes back and I said, what did they need? The remote dropped on the floor. I said, so you were going to wait for your CNA to be done with what they were doing because that resident just needed their call light or their remote picked up. And he's looked at me. And so I'm starting to get him into the thing like, just go see what's wrong. What if they're on the floor? Like what if something happens? Get up and go look. Um, and again, not everybody is comfortable with ADL care and changing briefs and doing stuff like that. And I told him, I said, if they need to be changed, let me know and I will come in and help you. But don't run your CNAs ragged if you're not doing anything. Like I could see if he was busy, if he was passing meds or if he was doing something else, but you're not doing anything. You're sitting at the nurse's station. It was a quiet night. I can say quiet now because the shift is over. So just remember that like your the CNAs are the backbone. They're your backbones. They're your eyes, your ears. And the better the relationship that you have with your CNAs, the better your job is going to be. Okay. I promise you. Oops. Problem solving. This is another thing. How do we solve problems? Problem solving is something that you are going to have to do. I mean, it's just something, it's everyday part of life, whether it's something simple, whether it's something a little bit more extensive, but we have problem solving steps that we can use in order to help solve problems. So the first thing is always to collect data, right? We sometimes what we think the problem is isn't always what the problem is, right? That's the problem with, when we look at conflict resolution and we look at problem solving, sometimes what we think the problem is isn't always the problem. So we want to get all the facts, okay? Then we want to identify what the problem is. So once we have, got all the information, identify what the problem is, and then set a goal. Whatever the goal is, much like the nursing process, right? You're going to set goals. Maybe you'll have short-term goals, maybe you'll have long-term goals, maybe you'll have both. And then how are we going to reach those goals? What can we do? And then did it work? Did those, interventions work, or do we need to go back and reevaluate? Again, it's just another way, much like the nursing process, for us to solve problems. Other specific skills that you need for leadership: documentation. Documentation, documentation, documentation. If it wasn't documented, it wasn't done, plain and simple. Legal aspects and federal regulations. Long-term care, I'm going to tell you, I haven't really looked a lot in the hospitals. I'm sure it's just as bad. But the federal regulations for long-term care, the book, it's called The Big Red Book. It's probably about this big. And it's all of the federal regulations for long-term care. You don't have to know the book. It covers everything. It covers everything, not just nursing. Okay. So there's specific areas for nursing, but it's a lot of information, things that you learn as you go. Organizational skills, we talked about time management. Continuous quality improvement is another one that you may be asked to be a part of, or the CQI committee. All right. So continuous quality improvement is something that we use. Let's say, like I was saying earlier, right? Say we have like an increased number of falls on the unit, or we have an increased number of pressure areas all of a sudden, whatever it is. We have this CQI committee. And you may be asked to be part of it. And basically it's more like it's a word I'm looking for. It's like brainstorming. Okay. You're going to look at all the falls that have occurred, and you're going to see if there's any common themes, or, is it what time of the day? Is there a certain pattern that you see? And then you look for ways, some ways to, prevent it from happening in the future, right? So it reviews past incidences to try to prevent them from happening again. Conflict resolution, talked about that wonderful problem solving process. Have to have human relationship skills. You have to be able to get along with people and relate to people. So anger management, you also will need to be able, you must, be able to do your performance evaluations on your nursing assistants. Empowerment, you want to increase their self-confidence, and also have that wonderful non-judgmental attitude. All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty now. All right. So these are some important, again, this is a big part of what your HESI is going to be like. It's also important for your exam, but we have assignment and we have delegation. All right. Assignment is I shouldn't have said it that, is the distribution of work that each staff member is responsible for during their given work period. Plain and simple. Their activities are consistent with their job description and position, their legal scope of practice, or education. The staff member assumes responsibility and is accountable for completing the assignment. So my CNAs, let's say I have 5 CNAs, I assign them their clients or their rooms, and they are responsible for, ADLs and bathing and feeding and dressing, all of, oral care, all of um, the general care for that client. That they are absolutely responsible for all of that care. Nobody else is responsible. They are responsible. Delegation is a little bit different, okay? Delegation is the transfer of responsibility for the performance of an activity from one individual to another, while accountability for the outcome is retained by the delegator, okay? For example, let's say I said, Janet, please go, or not, Janet, go get vital signs on Mr. Jones in room 300. Okay. I am delegating that duty to Janet. Janet is, she has to agree to the delegation. She said she has to say, yes, okay, no worries. I'll go get those vital signs. Okay. So she has to agree to it. But I am still responsible for those vital signs being done. Okay. Even though I have transferred the responsibility of getting them to Janet, I am still responsible for the outcome. That if Janet doesn't do it, it's my fault, not hers, basically, is what that means. Okay. It's something that in delegation is something that we do to ensure the accomplishment of cost-effective client care, which has been shown to increase client outcomes and satisfaction. Remember, nursing is not an individual sport. It is a team sport. Okay, so delegation, it is not mandatory. You don't have to delegate. This isn't something that you have to delegate. However, remember that. Nursing is not an individual sport. Sometimes you have to delegate some duties. Where can you find information about delegation? All right. So your State Nurse Practice Act. And I'm going to tell you, some state boards of nursing do not allow LPNs to delegate. So make sure that you know in your State Nurse Practice Act if you are allowed to delegate. It is not required. Like I said, you don't have to delegate. You can go do it all yourself. And you also, in addition to, prior to delegating, you also need to know the scope of practice of your CNAs and your UAPs. Okay, because you cannot delegate something that is outside of their scope of practice. For example, let's see. In some states, CNAs are trained to do tube feedings. Okay, I've not worked in one of those states, but okay, so in Virginia and in Texas, I cannot ask a CNA to do a tube feeding because that is outside of their scope of practice. All right. So you need to know what their legal scope of practice is as well. I'm also going to tell you too that you also need to know the policies and rules of delegation of your employer. So remember what I said, the Nurse Practice Act is an umbrella. Okay, this tells you in the state of whatever you're in, Pennsylvania, right? That this is what you can do in the state of Pennsylvania with your nursing license or with your CNA. Employers cannot go beyond that umbrella. They can't tell you that you can do something that is not allowed by the Nurse Practice Act, but they can limit what you can do under that Nurse Practice Act. Here's an example. In Virginia, the companies that I worked for in Virginia, all CNAs are trained to do vital signs, blood pressure, pulse, respiration, pulse ox, all that good stuff. They are trained to do vital signs within their education programs. In the company that I worked at, we did not allow our CNAs to do vital signs. So I could not delegate vital signs to a CNA because our company policy did not allow that. I come to Texas, same thing. The CNAs are taught to do vital signs and the facilities allow the CNAs to do vital signs. So I have some CNAs that really like to do vital signs, which I don't know why, but they'll be like, hey, I'll get your vitals for tonight. Like, okay, have fun. So you have to know, not only do you have to know what their scope of practice says, but you have to know what your policy and procedures are. Other ways, other area or other places that you can look about delegation, you can look at NAPNES, you look at your NALPN, They have practice standards. The NLN also has some resources for delegation as well. So these are some resources. You also have your RNs and other people at your facilities that can offer some guidance about this as well. But for delegation, we have rights. We have our 5 rights of delegation. All right. So with that, we have the right task, the right circumstances, the right person, the right direction and communication, and the right supervision and evaluation. Okay. So right task. The delegated task must conform to established guidelines. Again, this is going to be according to your Nurse Practice Act and the policies within the facilities that you are working with. All right. So just know what you can and cannot delegate. Delegated tasks for right circumstances that they don't require independent nursing judgment. Okay. CNAs, UAPs are not trained to make judgments. All right. You are just assigning a task. All right. To complete. All right. So this would mean that you actually have to go lay eyes on your patients before you decide to delegate a task. Right. So you can, if it's an emergency situation, or the patient's having a crisis or they're unstable, you cannot delegate to that UAP. The right person. Now, as you start working with your CNAs, you're going to decide who is qualified and competent to delegate tasks to. Sometimes it's and it's not always the CNA that's been the CNA the longest, okay? So you want to make sure that this person can communicate effectively, that they can collect the data that you need, and that they know how to perform the tasks appropriately and accurately according to, the standard practice. And it's somebody that is going to come back and say, I need help, or I need direction, or, I'm not quite sure what to do in this situation. So be mindful. And you're going to learn your CNAs when you start working. And then we've got the right direction and communication. So you're going to provide a clear explanation about the task and the outcomes and when they should report back to you. All right. You want to clarify the timeline and the expectations with the task that you are delegating. Okay. So it's not just telling them to go do something. All right. Unless it's an emergency, like you need them to go call 911 because somebody's coding. That's a little bit different, right? You have a discussion and explain to them exactly what it is that you want done. So like, Janet, please, go to 300. I need Mr. Jones's temperature, blood pressure, respirations, and O2 saturations. Please get them, within the, I need them back within 10 minutes, whatever the timeline is. Okay. Because otherwise, what happens? Janet, can you go get vital signs on room 300 for me? And Janet says, yeah. And then Janet's on her way, and maybe another resident calls her to the room, or another CNA needs assistance, and it's an hour later, and Janet hasn't gotten those vital signs yet. Right? We need clear direction on what needs to be, when it needs to be done, what needs to be done, and when to report back to the nurse. And then the right supervision and evaluation. All right. In some situations, especially if maybe it's the first time that you're delegating a task to somebody, you may wish to go with them and watch them perform the task. And that is okay, especially as a newer nurse and not really knowing the staff. You may want to just make sure that they're performing the procedure correctly. And whatever it is. Okay. So, but you also, feedback to assess and improve the process. You always want to go back and evaluate the outcomes, make sure your client is safe, happy, healthy, and all of that wonderful stuff. Oops. So again, right task, right circumstance, right person, right direction and communication, right supervision and evaluation. All right. So this kind of goes there. Why is delegating important? Again, it increases your effectiveness. I can't say it, I can say it so many times, but nursing is not an individual sport. It is a team sport. Everybody needs to work together in order to care for the clients and make sure that they get safe, cost-effective care. It also helps to, get those client goals and outcomes. And it also can help nursing assistants improve their job skills and increase their job skills, right? So, we talk about empowerment, and pushing people to be the best that they can be. In a lot of cases, this is what that does as well. A little bit more. Again, before you delegate, you need to assess your client. The client must be stable before you delegate a duty to a CNA. CNAs cannot delegate. Okay, so they cannot delegate. It is not within their scope of practice. So CNAs cannot delegate. Delegation cannot be transferred. So if I ask Janet to go get those vital signs, she can't turn around and tell Celicia to go get the vital signs. Okay. She has accepted the delegation, so she has to complete the task. She cannot delegate it to somebody else. Now, Janet can refuse me to delegate that duty. Okay. She can say, hey, I can't get those vital signs right now. And I'll ask her why. Why do you not want to get those vital signs? That is okay. For proper delegation, the function has to be voluntarily accepted. Okay, so you can't force somebody to accept a delegated duty. Those CNAs, they have the right to say, no, don't want to do that. And like I said, you're going to ask why. Why do you not want to, accept this delegated duty for whatever reason? Legal aspects of delegation. Delegate only if allowed by your state Nurse Practice Act and facility policies. Okay, so like I said, know your Nurse Practice Act, because some states, LPNs cannot delegate. Make sure that you determine the stability of your patient. They must be stable. They cannot be unstable. Delegate duties for which nursing assistants have demonstrated ability. So if you know that you have a nursing assistant that is not very good at collecting vital signs, then you're not going to ask them to go get those vital signs. If somebody doesn't know how to take a blood sugar, you're not going to ask them to go take a blood sugar. You want to make sure that you provide specific, objective, clear-cut directions to nursing assistants for those delegated duties. Provide assistance and instruction when you delegate a duty. And then you're going to monitor their activities while they are carrying out that delegated duty. So again, this could be either you're going to stand right there next to them and watch them do it, or you may just periodically check in. Like I said, as you're getting to know your CNAs, if you delegate a duty, you may want to watch them the first time that they do something for you so that you know that it is done correctly. Intervene if something is not being done safely. And then once they have completed the delegated task, then you want to go back and evaluate the safety and effectiveness of the duties that you delegated. And this is the key here. If you delegate improperly, okay, and a resident was harmed, you are liable, okay? So you could go in front of the Board of Nursing and it could result in disciplinary action and potentially a civil suit, okay? So let's say, trying to think of a good one. Let's say Mr. Jones or Mrs. Jones needs to have a Foley catheter inserted. And I ask, I don't know, let's get Tia, go put in that Foley catheter for me. And what did I say, Mrs. Jones? All right. And Tia goes in and she puts the Foley catheter in, and the resident develops a urinary tract infection and she gets sepsis and she ends up in the hospital. I delegated improperly. I never should have let Tia put that Foley catheter in. Okay, now I'm liable because she got an infection and she could possibly die from that. if I delegated properly and I monitored and the client was injury, the nursing assistant is always also liable. So we're both potentially liable. So let's say, oh, I'm trying to think of a good one. This is kind of be off the wall, but let's say I delegated a finger stick glucose level to Tamia. Hey, Tamia, go get Mrs. Smith's glucose level for me. Tamia goes in, she does the glucose level, perfect, no big deal. And let's say that Mrs. Jones just keeps bleeding for some reason, okay? And she's bleeding excessively and ends up having to go to the hospital because we can't get the bleeding to stop. Okay, like I said, a little off the wall, but that's what came to my head. All right, now we're both potentially right, even though it was correct, now we're both potentially right, liable for that. Questions about delegation. Anytime you're going to look at delegating a duty, you could collaborate with your RN. That may help to make some of those decisions. And they also may have additional feedback about your UAPs. Oh, your CNA, so that's something to take into consideration as well. And remember to follow the 5 rights of delegation, right? So, right task, circumstances, person, direction, communication, right supervision, and evaluation. So, what can we delegate? Again, you always want to look at the Nurse Practice Act to see what they can and cannot do in your state of practice. But general personal care, hygiene, dressing, toileting, grooming, skincare, feeding, hydration, basic restorative skills, transferring, positioning, ambulation, range of motion, vital signs, height and weight, INOs, assistance with elimination, including catheter care, safety, so fall preventions, heat and cold, infection prevention, specimen collections for urine and stool. What can we not delegate? Complex sterile procedures. So like I said, with that Foley catheter, right? Nursing assistants don't have in-depth training in sterile technique, okay? So if it requires a sterile procedure, we are not going to have a CNA do that. Crisis situations, you have to be there. Now, I'm not saying that a CNA or a UAP isn't going to help you, especially in a crisis situation. If you're doing a code, a CNA is usually going to be right there. You have to be there. Just like with anything, for us as or for you as an LPN, initial client education must be done by an RN. An RN cannot delegate that to an LPN to do. All right, so know that. LPNs can reinforce initial client teaching given by the RN. Nursing assistants can collect simple data, but they've not been trained to make decisions about or interpret that data. Okay, so if you have them go do a glucose level and it's 500, okay, their job is to simply bring that number back to you. They are not trained to decide if it needs to be rechecked or what to do with that level of 500 other than to bring that number back to you. When delegating to a UAP, again, it has to be within their scope of practice under their Nurse Practice Act. So you have to know your Nurse Practice Act and you have to know theirs, as well as the policies and procedures of your organizations. And then the last little part of this is, I don't know why it is like kind of at the end of the chapter, but what can you do to increase your employment opportunities? Certifications. So LPNs can get IV certified. They can do long-term care certification. You can do wound care certification. Depends on what you're interested in. Seminars, leadership courses, in services, reading articles. So, and you don't have to buy you don't have to go out and buy a whole bunch of journals. Go online, look at some of the journals that are online through the online library. A lot of your hospital systems have online libraries that you'll have access to. So you'll have access to nursing journals and network. So a lot of people don't get their dream job right out of nursing school, okay? And so, you may not get like, let's say you want to go work in, OB, right? You may not get that OB job right out of nursing school, or you may not get whatever is that wound care job, like, right out of nursing school. Um, Network. Go meet people that are working in those areas, right? So you'll get the inside like scoop, like, oh, hey, we just had somebody resign. There's going to be a position opening up, or, if they get to know your work and, how well you, do your job and things like that, then they may be a good reference for you. Or they can give you pointers on things that you should do in order to make yourself more employable. Again, it depends. But you never know. More certifications are opening up for LPNs, so that's something that you should look into as well, if you're interested in that. Like, I don't know, I'm not gonna lie, I am like probably not the best IV stick. We don't start a whole lot of IVs. Most of the time when we have somebody that needs an IV, it usually requires a central line, so we have to get a PICC line placed. But I just noticed that they actually have classes now to like teach you can get certified for PICC line insertion. I was like, that looks pretty cool, but I have a horrible stick. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I can draw blood all day long, but sometimes my IV skills are lacking. So, and I haven't started an IV in over a year. So I am probably not the best person to come to if you need an IV. Some have some really good IV skills. I am just not that person. Not that person. Everything else I'm great with, just not good with IVs. All right, let's take a break. Be back at, let's just do 4:20 and we're going to do some practice questions. All right. Give me 1 second. I had another PowerPoint with practice questions on it. I just don't know where it is right this second. But I will put some in the chat, or not the chat, in the announcements as well. So additional questions, I'll put them in the announcements. So I'll do 2 separate announcements, one with questions, one with the answers. But we have some other delegation stuff. So let's go here. So again, why do we delegate? It's absolutely necessary. You're gonna, if you don't know how to multitask right now, you need to really be able to pick up on those skills, learn how to multitask. It's a lot of work. It doesn't matter if you're in a hospital or a long-term care setting. And so delegation is going to become an important part of what you will do. It allows you to multiply yourself, right? That not only saves you time, but it develops the competency and the capability of your team and the team members. So, and why do we not delegate? One, I enjoy what I do. I don't want to sacrifice the work. Believe it or not, people don't like to delegate. No one else can do it as well as I can. And that's always usually what it is. Why delegate? I can just go do it myself. It may make me look bad if someone does a better job than me. I don't want to burden other people. It's easier to do it myself. The company expects me to do the work. I don't want to jeopardize my position by making myself irrelevant. Trust me, it doesn't. Delegation is part of what we do. It does help to get everything done that you need to get done. So learn how to delegate. Don't try to do it all yourself. Again, know your scope of practice, know the scope of practice and job descriptions of who you're delegating to, the condition of the client, and the 5 rights. Okay. So RNs, assessment, initial teaching, care of clients that require frequent monitoring in unstable conditions. LPNs usually will have stable clients with expected outcomes, and UAP, they have standard unchanging procedures. Okay, so there we go. So again, you have to assess your client before you go and delegate any duties. There's your 5 rights again: right task, right circumstance, right person, right direction and communication, right supervision and evaluation. So here we go. You have, which of the following clients would the RN delegate to the LPN? So 1, a post-op client who just came out from the operating room. 2, a new admission from the ED. 3, a 3-day-old chest pain. Or 4, a client receiving an insulin drip. Which of those clients can the LPN accept care for?
3.
3.
Very good. Yep, that 3-day-old chest pain, right? So post-op client that just came out of the OR, they're not stable, right? They're going to require a little bit of extra care. A new admission is going to require that admission assessment, and that client receiving an insulin drip needs to be monitored appropriately. And that's outside of your scope. So that patient that's had chest pain for 3 days, stable. Come on, there's my mouse. All right, which patient with a health problem related to GI cancer would be the most appropriate to assign to an LPN? So, a patient who needs a blood transfusion secondary to GI bleeding, a patient who needs enemas and antibiotics to control GI bacteria. 3, a patient who needs preoperative teaching for bowel resection surgery. Or 4, a patient who needs central line insertion for chemotherapy.
2.
2.
Okay. Yes, good job. All right.
Certain personnel reports to the LPN that the patient's urine output for the past 24 hours has been only 360 ml. What is the measure reduction at this time? 24.
Which one?
I don't think she realized she was unmuted. It's okay. So the assisted personnel reports to the LPN that a patient's urine output for the past 24 hours has only been 360 mLs. What's the priority action? So are we going to place an 18 gauge IV? Are we going to elevate the patients out of bed? Are we going to instruct the AP to provide the patient with a pitcher of ice water? Or are we going to contact and notify the healthcare provider immediately?
Four.
Yes. What's minimum urine output?
30.
30 ml.
An hour
Hour.
times 24. Right?
There you go. 30 mLs an hour. So 720, right, for 24 hours. So that's a significant decline. All right. Which actions should the LPN delegate to an assisted personnel for the patient with diabetes? So this is select all that apply. So 1, checking finger stick glucose results every hour. 2, recording intake and output every hour. 3, measuring vital signs every shift. 4, assessing for indicators of fluid imbalance. 5, notify the healthcare provider of changes in glucose level. Or 6, assist the patient to reposition every 2 hours.
I say 2, 3, 6.
Yes, I
Six
want
for
to say
me.
2,
2,
3,
3,
6.
6.
And 1. They could do 1 too.
I don't know.
Every hour? Yeah.
I mean, if they can do the accurate checks, then they could do it.
They can't do it every hour or every year.
Yep. So it's going to be
Tuesday.
INOs, vital signs, and assisting the patient to reposition every 2 hours. All right. 4 patients arrive simultaneously at the emergency department. Which patient requires the most rapid action by the triage nurse and LPN assisting to protect other patients from infection? So 1, we have a 3-year-old who has paroxysmal coughing and whose sibling has pertussis. 2, we have a 5-year-old patient who has a new pruritic rash and possible measles. 3, we have a 62-year-old patient who has an ongoing methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus abdominal wound infection. Or 4, we have a 74-year-old patient who needs tuberculosis testing after being exposed to TB during a recent international airplane flight.
4.
I think 4 too. 4 too.
So most
4.
rapid action.
You said, well, 2 is possible measles.
Mhm.
1, the assistant, they have it. And then I'm tossed between 1 and 3.
Okay.
Marlene is the worst 3.
Okay. All right, let's see. It is measles. How is measles spread?
Wow.
Airborne.
Yep. So
So even if
measles,
it's possible, like if it's not confirmed, you still have to.
yeah, because they have the rash. Usually we, like, yes, it is spread airborne, but usually you can tell it's measles by looking at the rash, even though it's not been officially diagnosed, right? Because we're just seeing them, right? We're just looking at them right now. The 62-year-old with MRSA, that's not a big deal, right? Unless you're digging in that abdominal wounds,
Oh yeah,
right?
it's contact upper.
Yeah. And then the 74-year-old who needs TB testing after being exposed to TB, yes, they're going to need to be isolated. However, right, it's not an immediate rapid, does not require rapid action. So that measles is the one we're worried about. All right. The LPN is caring for a patient with osteoporosis who is at an increased risk for falls. Which intervention should the nurse delegate to the assistive personnel? So 1, identifying environmental factors that increase the risk for falls. 2, monitoring gait, balance, and fatigue level with ambulation. 3, collaborating with the physical therapist to provide the patient with a walker. Or 4, assisting the patient with ambulation to the bathroom and in the halls.
I want to say 4.
4.
Or,
4.
4.
yep, absolutely. Right? They can assist. They can't do a lot of collaboration. They can't monitor and they can't identify, right? So assisting that patient with ambulation. Good job. All right. The charge nurse observes an LPN assigned to provide all of these interventions for a patient with Paget's disease. Which action requires the charge nurse to intervene? So, one, administering 600 milligrams of ibuprofen to the patient. Two, encouraging the patient to perform exercises recommended by a physical therapist, sorry. Three, applying ice and gentle massage. I can't even say the word, gentle massage to the patient's lower extremities. Or four, reminding the patient to drink milk and eat cottage cheese.
Okay, first, can you tell me what Paget's disease is?
Sure. So it is how do I explain it? It's a bone disorder. It disrupts the recycling of process of bone. So it causes an abnormal breakdown of the bone. And then the bone that is like starts to grow isn't as strong as the other bone. So it makes the bones bigger, it makes them softer, and it makes the bones weaker.
All right, increased risk for fractures and stuff like that.
Yes.
Okay.
I think ice would not be good. I don't know.
I don't know either. I was looking at number 3
Could
before I
it
knew
be
the word.
2? Because you said that they're fragile, so exercise probably wouldn't be the best.
Okay, so remember, okay.
4.
What about
Uh,
1? I'm sorry.
We done picked everyone. We picked 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Oh, but 1.
Ibuprofen, what does that do to the bones? Like, I'm trying to
it
think.
won't, yeah, it won't do anything. It may
It's
help.
GI. That's GI Marcus.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right.
And I
Um,
think 4 is okay because
I'll
milk
say
is going to
3.
help with bone.
right, because it's got
But
the
I
So
the
it's
just feel like
3.
ice could
So it
cause.
gotta be 3.
Because remember
so
something like if you add, I know, Miss. I
It
remember if you put ice
constricts
on
the
Yeah, I think it might be 3 because ice causes constriction,
could cause
right?
constriction and you can fracture.
very good. Yeah.
He
So
said, yep, yep,
All
yep.
right.
Yep. So we don't do ice. If anything, we may use some heat. But Paget's is a chronic disorder, causes bones to grow larger, become weaker, and we don't want to massage because we could actually cause more damage. Okay. So, or if we put too much pressure, we can actually cause, those bones to fracture even more. So we don't do massage. Now, somebody said exercise, and I want to, so anybody that has a bone disorder, okay, whether it's Paget's, whether it's even osteoporosis, we want them to do weight bearing exercises. So walking, the physical therapist also they'll have, they know exactly what exercises to recommend for those patients to do. But yes, weight bearing exercises and bone diseases like osteoporosis and other things actually help to strengthen the bone. So we do want to encourage that. Now, some other exercises may, like being in a pool may help a little bit more, right, for muscle toning and things like that. But so, yes, so good job. Um, you guys did good. I do have a couple more, unless those were my questions. I don't think those were my questions. No, I have a couple more questions that I will put in the announcements for you guys. Like I said, I'll put the questions in and then I'll put the answers in a different announcement so that you can, try to answer the questions first and then go look at the answers. But I can put them back. Actually, it's two separate documents. I can put them in one. That's not that big deal. But all right. So I did an exam review last night. I posted it. I have some previous exam reviews too that we'll post in the announcements for you guys. What questions do you have for me? We have our exam next week. Crickets. I know it's Friday, guys. I know. Come on. Work with me
There
here.
was a something, I don't know, it was on the quiz. I got it right, but I really dislike process of elimination. It was something about when a doctor is trying to perform a medical procedure on a minor. It was like beneficent, but
Beneficent paternalism.
yes, like can you go a little bit into that?
Yes. So beneficent paternalism, generally speaking, is a very disrespectful attitude that we have. It's that I know what's best for you attitude, right? And we try to avoid this in patient care, right? That doesn't support the patient's autonomy, right? So like if patients ask us what they should do, right? We tell them, well, what's best for you. With a child. So let's say we have a child that comes in, and I'm going to use Jehovah Witnesses only because I actually did research on this and it actually would apply. So let's say we have a child that comes in, they've had a trauma, they've had lost a lot of blood, and they need a blood transfusion. And the parents refuse the blood transfusion. What the provider can do is petition the court to get permission to get a court order to provide that blood transfusion. That is beneficent paternalism. Okay, so it's basically a way, it's if only in emergency situations where parents are refusing life-saving care that we can use that process. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. Any other questions? Y'all good? Promise?